Speaker, we're very pleased. All the way from Sarasota, Florida, through Kansas City, just to speak to us. He's heading back to Florida right after he's done. The S may be silent in his name, but he will not be. Please welcome to the stage Peter Levesque, President of CMA, CGM North America, and American President Alliance, to talk to us about supply chains in the post-pandemic world. Peter?
Thanks, Wink, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Day 2 of the USC Global Supply Chain Excellence Summit. It's great to be back here on campus. My daughter, Catherine, just graduated from USC in May after cramming a 4-year degree into just 6 years. In fact, I think this is the first time I've been on campus when I haven't been paying a tuition bill or having my visa maxed out at the university bookstore. So it's sort of liberating, and Nick, thank you for your kind invitation to join you here this morning. I want to talk to you this morning about supply chains in the post-COVID world, specifically around the areas of infrastructure, import strategy, geopolitical risk, and supply chain sustainability. Well, let me start with infrastructure because it's the point that I get most upset about, U.S. infrastructure in particular. On May 17, 1884, P.T. Barnum led 21 elephants and 17 camels across the newly constructed Brooklyn Bridge. He didn't do it to promote his circus. He did it to prove to the people of New York that the Brooklyn Bridge was safe and that it wouldn't fall into the East River. Today, 139 years later, I can't help but wonder how many of our dilapidated bridges and roads P.T. Barnum would dare cross with those same elephants. America's supply chains depend on reliable infrastructure. And ladies and gentlemen, American infrastructure is broken. And that's just the fact. Most of the key infrastructure we use today was constructed in the 1960s. The population of the United States has doubled since the 1960s. So we have twice as many people on roads, rail, and bridges on infrastructure that was designed and built 6 decades ago. The port congestion that occurred during COVID highlighted just how serious the issues are and generated an unprecedented sense of urgency from the White House and Capitol Hill to resolve the underlying structural issues on our infrastructure that were wreaking havoc on the nation's supply chain. Today, the congestion problems have gone away. Make no mistake, the underlying decay of our national infrastructure has not. And because supply chain congestion isn't on the front page news anymore, the sense of urgency, particularly in Washington, seems to also have faded away. Congress passed a new federal infrastructure bill that offers billions of dollars worth of grant money for development projects, and on the face of it, this should be great news. But the reality is that the federal permitting process that's required to get those funds is also broken. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce notes that it takes on average 7.7 years to get federal permitting for ports, rail, and bridge projects. The permitting process for the ship channel navigation in Lake Charles, Louisiana, for example, took 14 years. The permitting process to build the Havelock Bypass in North Carolina took 27 years. We congratulate the state of California for its recent $1.5 billion state grant to improve port infrastructure, including $600 million to LA and Long Beach. This is the kind of urgency that we need across the country. And we're working closely with Suzanne Clark and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington to lobby the White House, the Department of Transportation, and anybody else who will listen for expedited permit reform. The truth is, our post-COVID supply chain is only as stable as our next crisis. And believe me, there will be more crisis. A recent McKinsey supply chain study concluded that the major disruptive events that impact global supply chain for a month or more, whether it's environmental, cyber, economic, or geopolitical, are occurring now, on average, every 3.7 years. And supply chain disruption that lasts over 3 months is now happening on average every 5 years. So what does that mean? It means we can expect more disruption more often. And there's no telling what kind of crisis we're going to face next, but when it comes to keeping fluidity in the supply chain, we can't get caught up in believing, or the trap of believing, that there won't be another crisis. Denial is just not an acceptable strategy here. Our infrastructure is also key to our national security and our global competitiveness, and in this regard, China is light years ahead. Having spent over 25 years living and working in the Asia-Pacific region, I was able to witness firsthand the unprecedented development of Chinese mainland, from farms and bicycles to skyscrapers and high-speed rail. Today, China has 177,000 kilometers of new highway, 50,000 kilometers of new high-speed rail, and they're home to 7 of the world's top 10 ports. China is also on the forefront of technology in AI, automation, and robotics, and today they're spending more money on microchips than they are on oil. So when we anticipate potential global supply chain disruption, we must take the risk of geopolitical conflict with China seriously. If you ask the experts in Washington, they'll tell you that the U.S.-China relationship has never been worse. This is unsettling because we have $5 trillion worth of goods flowing through the South China Sea every year. And if tension in the South China Sea becomes conflict in the South China Sea, global supply chains and the U.S. economy in particular will be severely impacted. I admit these aren't pleasant things to think about, but from the perspective of national security and global competitiveness, these are things we have to think about, and these are things that we have to have contingency plans in place for. And my apologies if I've sounded a little bit too pessimistic here already this morning. Just keep in mind that a pessimist is really just an optimist with experience. Let me switch gears here and talk about the positive changes that are occurring in the post-COVID world with regard to supply chain management, because there are several that should be noted. During COVID, major importers and retailers came to the unsettling realization that they had too many of their sourcing eggs in one basket, and that basket was China. Wuhan had 50,000 Tier 1 suppliers and 5 million Tier 2 suppliers just in that province alone. And when Wuhan closed down and the rest of China quickly followed, it became clear to major U.S. importers and retailers that they needed a more diversified approach to sourcing. Post-COVID, we have seen a significant shift in sourcing away from China to places like Southeast Asia, India, Latin America, and Mexico. Vietnam has been obviously one of the biggest benefactors of the shift. And to be clear, China will remain a sourcing location for global retailers. That's not going to change. What's changed is the strategy of importers to diversify their sourcing risk by adding more countries to the mix. This trend will continue further as companies consider the risk of U.S.-China relations and the benefits of reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring, which I'm sure you've all heard everything about. The sourcing shift away from China, though, is driving a second wave of risk mitigation by U.S. importers as they diversify their U.S. port usage. And this is something that we've seen quite a bit over the last year. Sourcing from China favors the trans-Pacific carriers across the Pacific into the U.S. West Coast. But sourcing from Southeast Asia, India, Latin America, and to some extent Mexico favors trade into the U.S. East Coast and Gulf ports. Noel's coming up next, so I know he's going to have a rebuttal on this one, so we'll wait to hear from him. Where is he? There he is. We're seeing this play out in the TU market share shift from West Coast to East Coast that's happening today. And to be fair, the volume shift from West to East was happening long before COVID, and some argue that it was labor relations on the West Coast that's been the reason for the accelerating shift. And while the labor situation may have played a short-term role in the shift from West to East, the core reason for the eastbound shift comes from the sourcing changes I just described and U.S. importers redesigning their supply chains to take advantage of a broader number of gateway ports. At CMA, we're addressing the growth of the East Coast market share with our recent purchase of global container terminals in New York and New Jersey. The new terminal will be branded Port Liberty, and we're very proud of it. It will add over 2 million TEUs of container capacity to CMA's ocean vessel operations and allow us to capture market growth on the East and control our own destiny when it comes to port efficiency and customer satisfaction. Another positive trend that we see is around global supply chain sustainability. As our planet experiences one of the hottest summers on record, the sense of urgency around decarbonizing the global supply chain continues to intensify. With more than 600 container ships and more than 54 container terminals around the world, this is an issue that we take very seriously at CMA, and we're leading by example across the industry to green our operations, lower our CO2 emissions, and care for our oceans. We were already a leader in the development of LNG container ships, and today we're investing billions of dollars in constructing the next generation of container ship powered by methanol. We have a dedicated team of environmental engineers in Marseille who do nothing but work on the development of new and improved biofuels to fuel the ships of the future. We're actively working to electrify our container terminal operations around the world, and we're trying to understand where that electricity is actually coming from. Because as we've discovered, there is no sense in electrifying a terminal if all the electricity is coming from a coal-powered burning plant right down the road. So we're taking the steps to look back in the power grid to see where is the electricity coming from, and are there countries where we can actually help green the electricity before we green the terminal. We've launched a new $1.5 billion sustainability fund to accelerate the environmental projects around the world that will make the biggest impact on society. And we've partnered recently with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Massachusetts to deploy buoy systems that will help prevent deadly ship strikes on the right whale population in the North Atlantic. So at CMA, we're doing our part around sustainability. We know that our competitors and our suppliers are as well, but we understand also that there's still a long, long way to go, and time is of the essence. The question now, after 3 tumultuous years of COVID, is what have we learned from the experience, and how will we apply what we've learned to make our domestic and international supply chains more resilient in the years ahead? In an industry that's been historically slow to adopt new technologies, we now see a strong push to develop and implement the latest in automation, robotics, and AI learning tools, which will help improve efficiency, lower cost, and provide better service to our customers. That's good news. We also see the very positive trend I've discussed around sourcing and port diversification by U.S. importers, which will help prevent shortages and reduce congestion during the next crisis. That's also good news. And now we've all had the experience of working through a global pandemic. And if you think about it, we've learned how to get things done while sheltering in place, working from home, schooling the kids during Teams calls and dogs barking, and traveling with masks. This has to be a good thing as well, because when the next crisis rolls around, we've been through something that none of us has ever been through before. None of these positive trends, however, will be sustainable if we don't quickly address our decaying national infrastructure, and that won't be possible without a federal permitting process that's built for speed. You don't build a house from the roof down, you start with a strong foundation. And you can't build resilient supply chains without a strong underlying infrastructure to support them. In this, the most powerful and innovative country in the world, we shouldn't need P.T. Barnum and his elephants to prove to us that our infrastructure is safe, and the bureaucracy for getting shovels in the ground to rebuild our nation's infrastructure shouldn't be a three-ring circus. Those are my comments for this morning. Thank you very much, and fight on.